I'm about to show you a game where an 1800 rated opponent's king willingly walked the plank and weaved his own checkmating net. Get that intro in here. We're gonna start this game with a little e4, e5. I'm sure you've never seen that before. We have knight c3, knight f6. It's time for the Vienna Gambit, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, my opponent does not take and allow me to play e5, kicking the knight all the way back. Instead, they play d6. Lame, I know. So I play knight f3, we have knight c6, and bishop b5. Bishop b5 aims to pin the knight to the king, threatening to take, and win a pawn. So, naturally, you should play something like bishop d7, blocking the pin, so that this is no longer a threat. But instead, my opponent gets a little silly and takes on f4 right away. Which, just kind of wastes time, It allows me to play d4 and take the entire center. Now I'm threatening to play d5 and win the knight, actually, because it's pinned, if I could play this. Although there is like a6 and then bishop back here. And then you can actually like sack the knight, assuming I've already played d5. Let me show that on the board, actually. So let's say like bishop e7, yeah? And like d5. If a6, b5, looking to like get rid of this pin on the knight, you can actually sacrifice here and take like this, and you're still going to win the knight, which is really fun. Because after like castles, then bishop takes, and you win a pawn this way, actually. It's a very common thing. It can happen on the king side as well. But let's go back. So yeah, e takes f4 and d4 happens. And bishop d7 blocks the pin, so now d5 is not a threat. And I take on f4. So now I've got a beautiful center. All of my pieces developed to very good squares. My queen is going to get in, and my king might castle long. I'm going to have the open f-file. It's a good time. I'm having a good time. So we have bishop e7. And queen d2, because I want to castle long. I want to castle long because it's a bit more aggressive. I want to start maybe launching these pawns forward, get my rook lifted possibly to the third rank, start attacking the king. And I feel like my bishops are going to look pretty good over here, staring at the king side, my knight jumping in. So that was my idea. We have a6. I didn't want to take the knight, right? I don't want to do this because now my opponent just has the bishop pair, and I wanted my light squared bishop, so I don't take. Instead, I go back. Although then he plays knight b4, because he really wants my bishop, right? He wanted me to probably take here, but now he's going after my bishop this way. And I didn't want to move my bishop again and look like an absolute fool just moving my bishop from b5 to d3 to e2, right? I didn't want to just constantly move my bishop around, so I'm like, okay, you can take my bishop, but I'm going to play e5, which is the best move. So I play e5, looking to shred open the center, because I've got my queen and my rook staring down the d-file, and I got this rook coming in as well, and I want to start attacking. It opens up my bishop, although he's going to take, and I'm just looking to open everything up and get some attack going. He takes, I take back, and we have knight g4. Knight g4 threatens a fork, a triple fork, actually, so you have to defend that. You have a few different ways. You could drop the bishop back to defend, the queen, the rook up. I end up choosing rook h to f1, getting my rook to the open f-file and preventing the knight from jumping to that f2 square. D takes e5, opens the center, which is what I wanted. Now, my opponent does have the bishop pair, but I figure what I have going for me is better piece coordination. I mean, look at all of this. The bishops are on the 7th rank. The queen is blocked. He's got like no space, right, with all the pawns. The knight looks very silly. Meanwhile, I've got space. I've got a pawn in the center, and I've got all my pieces out. The rooks are out, and I feel like even though I don't have the bishop pair, I'm going to benefit from this open position. So I take with the knight, and we trade. Na 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 na, hey, subscribe. Now look at this. I've got the bishop, my queen, the rooks either doubling or, lifting to the third rank. I got the pawns coming in. The knight can swing in if need be. I feel like I've got something going here. I know it says equality, probably because of the bishop pair, honestly, is why black has equality here and can start, firing away on the queen side as well. But with opposite side castling, it's going to be chaotic. So you have bishop g5. The bishops start getting annoying. It's a little check. I move my king out of the way. And then this bishop comes in. Again, the bishop pair in this open position is quite annoying. That's why black has equality here, even though it looks like I have better attacking prospects, right? It's just because all of these squares covered by the bishops is so annoying. So I have to move my rook to e1 in order to not lose my rook, right? So we have bishop back, and now the bishops do look a little silly, because what are they doing, right? They're staring into empty space. So that's good for me, is there's no real targets right now. So I play queen g3. Queen g3 tries to set something up. Let's say we have this. Well, guess what? Yes, I can take on c7, and apparently that is the best move. It's like +2 after this, just winning a pawn, hitting the queen. And the computer says to counterattack my queen, and then something like this. But my idea was actually to play this, right? To play h4, and then bishop has to go back to h6, and now the bishops look quite silly. And I figured here I can start, you know, getting my rooks involved, or the knight swinging in, something like this. That was my idea. Apparently the computer doesn't like it, but hey, what are you gonna do? We have bishop back to g6, covering the g file so that my queen and bishop can't team up on the g7 pawn right now. My queen no longer sees that pawn. But did you notice that c7 pawn was hanging? It was hanging in the other variation, but it's still hanging here. Yeah, that's a free pawn now. I could just take this, hit the queen, and yes, it does open the c file, which my opponent could use to attack my king, especially with the bishops, but I figure I'm going to take this pawn. And now I've got a passed pawn. I have a central passed pawn, and I'm the only one with a pawn in the center, right? And I've still got better, you know, piece coordination. So I went ahead and took the pawn. Queen moves out of the way, and we go ahead and trade bishops like this. Both of our bishops, well, this one is hanging, but if I take it, I lose defense of this, but that's okay. It's an equal trade. And now I'm up a pawn, and my opponent no longer has the bishop pair, which I thought was going to help me out. Although, keep in mind, the more pieces that get traded, and since it is such an open position, there's not a lot of pawns congesting the board, this bishop in the long run is going to be better than my knight. It's just kind of how it is, right? Especially since we're going to have pawns going on both sides of the board in the endgame, right? I have a 4-on-2 over here and like a 3-on-2. So in an endgame, perhaps the bishop may be better at reaching both sides of the board, and my knight is going to struggle to deal with that. But there's still enough pieces on the board to minimize the bishop's power, right? So I play h4, looking to play h5 and trap the bishop. So my opponent plays h6, creating room for the bishop, luft for the king, and attacking my queen, of course. So I move my queen to e7. I offer this queen trade because I'm up a pawn. And I did say the endgame might not be insanely better for me, even though I am up a pawn, just because of how good the bishop will be. But I went for it anyway, figuring that I have good activity, right? And the passed pawn, and I was banking on this. So we have b5, because that pawn was indeed hanging, and I push. I push d5. I want to make a queen, right? So I start pushing my pawn, and you'll see my main game plan is to hold on to that pawn as long as possible and keep my opponent tied down to preventing it from reaching the back rank and becoming a queen. So we have rook d8, rook f to d8, kind of stopping the pawn in its tracks, yeah? And so I defend the pawn. Just in case of b4, because the knight is defending the pawn. And if I play something like this, and then b4, I have to move the knight, and I lose the rook, right? So I go ahead and preemptively defend the pawn with my rook on d1. We have rook d6, looking to double rooks and try to win this pawn. So I go ahead and play knight e4, hitting the rook and, you know, enticing the bishop to take, which my opponent does. And now I'm happy, because now I'm in a rook endgame up a pawn without that knight and bishop imbalance, and I benefit from that. So we have our rooks all lining up on the d file, right? It's all about this pawn. The entire game now is about this pawn on d5. Both rooks for either of us, right? So let's see. We have h5. Okay, h5, you know, I'm not sure. It doesn't do a whole lot. It kind of stops my pawn, I guess, but I'm not planning on pushing this pawn, so I don't know. We have h5. and I play b3. b3 gives my king luft, but also prepares c4. Because if I play c4 and we have takes, I'm going to get 2 passed pawns. And that's going to be a lot better than 1, right? And we see g6, and I do indeed play c4, and we have takes. Now look at the eval. Now that I have 2 connected passed pawns, it's very much in white's favor here. Because black is not going to have time to push this 3-on-2 and create a passer, especially, you know, because he kind of shot himself in the foot here playing h5, because now he can't play this move, whereas before, this move could have been possible, right? Because the pawn defends that square as well. But now, you kind of froze yourself here. So after I get these passed pawns, my opponent gives me a check, of course, because why not? Rook b6 check, I move my king to c2, and he goes to the c file looking to get counterplay on my king over here, but the pawns can start rolling. I didn't do it the right way. I played d6, which is still good, but not as good as c5. I was worried about this, right? And after moving my king, you know, the rook, but here's the thing. Can't worry about these pawns right now because these pawns are much scarier, right? We have d6 coming and you're not stopping 2 connected passed pawns, right? But instead, I just push this pawn, which allows, after d7 is also not great. I'm getting 2 ahead of myself. I need to play c5. So the pawns march together, right? Instead, I just push one of them. And what's the point of having 2 if you're only going to push 1? It was very silly of me. But here we are. And the rook stops the pawn. And now I play c5. The reason that this isn't as good as the other option is because the rook can stop the pawn like this, and I have to worry about defending it. Okay, so the rook goes back to c7 and keeps an eye on the d7 pawn, looking to get the king into e7 and win this pawn. Let's see if he's able to do that. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, he's not. You like my little rap there? Okay, we have king c3, king to e7, right? Trying to win the pawn, but I give a check. And now the king marches forward. I go back. We don't repeat moves. He goes to e6 instead. But now I get this check on d6, which allows me to push my pawn to c6. And now d7's not going anywhere because this pawn, oh yeah, now they're connected once more. They have reunited in the final stretch here of the game. And the pawn is now defended by my rook, which was granted access to this square by the king. Notice also, this is the beginning of the end for the king. He is marching himself into my position and getting less and less breathing room for his king while I'm still trying to push these pawns. So I play c6 and king e5. This doesn't do a whole lot. In fact, it's a really bad move because I start giving these checks and the king has to come forward. And now I bring my king c4. My idea? Get the king in here and help out these pawns, right? They need more help. We have f5. Opponent doesn't know what else to do. His rooks are frozen here, stopping my pawns. So he tries to get something going over here, but I just take on g6. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the king walks the plank and steps off by playing f4. f4 takes away the only square the king had access to. The rook cuts off this square, this square, this square. And imagine rook e6, yeah? The king can go to f4. That's the only square. But after he plays f4, he wove himself a checkmating net with rook e6. Rook e6, look at this. He blocked himself in and walked into this mate. He started here on g8 and walked his king all the way forward, right? And then he walked and walked and walked and, you know, and he just closed himself in. This was insane. So yeah, this is just checkmate with the rook stuck, stopping these pawns, nowhere to help the king, right? This is insane. Complete domination of the white king and rooks and pawns over this king that marched way too far out of his territory in a position that it wasn't appropriate. Wow. All right, well, hey, if you made it to the end of this video, I would like to thank you. If you did like the video, make sure you like the video. and subscribe. I would appreciate that. And feel free to leave me a comment below. Let me know why you like chess so much, or maybe what you're trying to work on, what you're trying to improve upon, maybe some ideas for videos that I can make. All right. Well, hey, that's all I've got for you today. Have a good one, guys.